Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy 420, where today we are going to be discussing some early risers at the tight end position in terms of tiers who I like for the upcoming 2019-2020 fantasy football season. I have 5 names who, for various reasons, I think will have a really good season next year and jump up tier 2 and become an elite fantasy option, possibly if things break their way. That being said, there's a lot of off-season to still look out for. Jared Cook and free agency is still a factor. We also have the draft, preseason, injuries, depth chart shakeups. So this is extremely early. Nothing's set in stone. Things can change. But this is going to be our last position that we are going to look at, finish up, and then we can move forward with other material. So moving forward with the video, I wanted to first mention that there is a perceived big 3 right now, obviously in the world of fantasy tight ends. Those 3 names being Zach Ertz, Travis Kelce, and George Kittle for the San Francisco 49ers. Those guys are perceived big 3, so I'll just keep them in a tier of their own. But these 2 guys that I will first start to mention, I think could enter that tier, even have number 1 overall tight end upside. But that being said, I'd be shocked if they didn't finish the year as at least a tight end 1. So the first name I'm going to go into is Vance McDonald. He finished last year as the number 10 tight end overall in Yahoo. And overall, he is extremely early ADP, which I'm going to be using off of fantasypros.com as a barometer. He's around tight end 20, which is pretty crazy to me. I would mention at the start, I did a few mock drafts on draft.com, best ball using the app. I did one yesterday, a full featured video. I'd appreciate it if you check that out. But people in those drafts are starting to catch on to Vance McDonald. So if you're going to want him, you might have to scroll down and reach for him a little bit. But that being said, I think it would definitely be worth it. Like I said, sky is the limit for this guy. Possibly tight end overall number 1 upside. Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown obviously leaving. Jesse James also leaving. More out of their backup wide receiver possibly combination. And I am seeing at least 200 targets being freed up in that offense going into next year. James Conner, not exactly a huge pass catcher out of the backfield. So I just think he's going to be a huge recipient of those targets along with James Washington and maybe Dante Moncrief or whoever they draft. But McDonald should receive a really big portion of that. Obviously, there's a lot of offensive talent lost, but I still expect them with Big Ben being older. They're going to contend for that division. The Browns are obviously looking as a favorite, but they could still be the Browns. The NFL changes from year to year, so if the Steelers just start out hot, they're going to be right in there for a playoff spot, I believe. Maybe the team chemistry is better without Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. So you never know. It's still a good enough team to buy into. The Bengals being weak, so the Ravens lost a lot on defense, so I think it's still worth it to buy into that offense. It's just certain parts of it, McDonald being one that I would really like. Definitely passed the eye test last season when he got the ball. 75-yard stiff arm, play of the year candidate on Monday Night Football against Tampa Bay. Various other plays he had. He's a very big body. 3rd year in that offense. Chemistry is there with Big Ben. Like I said, there's a ton of upside here, and I would definitely pull the trigger, possibly what would be perceived early on Vance McDonald. Moving on, another name I really like, O.J. Howard, finished the year as the 12th overall tight end. His early ADP is number 4, so a few people might be saying, oh, he's not really a riser, and he's technically not, but a lot of more websites have him ranked around 6, maybe even a little bit later, and I do like him as my firm number 4 tight end overall going into next year. He played 9 games last year before he was limited with his right leg injury that put him on the IR. And out of those 9 games, he had 6 double-digit games and 3 under 10 points. So obviously really reliable. Cameron Brate, who was always perceived as to be that guy who was going to take volume away from OJ Howard and touchdowns, really fizzled at the end of last year. And I think they're just going to be moving on from him at this year, or move after this year, obviously, but I think it's going to start this season. Deshaun Jackson's gone, Adam Humphries gone, and Tampa Bay has a lot of incentive to do well with Bruce Arians as a new head coach. He's revived 2 franchises so far, so I really like that, what's going on for him since 2017, and he's been drafted. His 16.62 yards per reception is actually most for tight ends. So the big playability is there. So like I said, I would have him as the number 4 tight end right now with a bullet, possibly a number 1 overall upside. He was the best tight end, first round pick in the 2017 draft. So hitting that year 3 stride, I really like that name. Another name going forward is Dallas Goedert for the Philadelphia Eagles. This name I will also mention was brought to my attention by Ballhawk Fantasy Football. So I will leave you a link in his YouTube if you didn't get to see my video today. I wanted to give him another mention, and he really gets the credit for bringing Dallas Goedert to my eyes. He finished 21 overall in tight end last year, and he has an early ADP on Fantasy Pros right now of around 22. At the very least, I think if you draft Zach Ertz, he's a must-have handcuff. And he has upside in that offense, especially considering you pick Zach Ertz in the first 3 rounds. You have to reach for Goddard, but you have to get him on your team. Just the amount of capital you're paying at that premium position and how well Goddard has looked and the role he would assume in that offense and how much of a wasteland that position was in 2018. If you draft Zach Ertz, you have to reach a few rounds, maybe for Goddard, at least a round or so from where you think he's going to be picked. 2nd round pick from Philadelphia last year in 2018, has a really good year. He's most likely on this list also because if we get a 2017 Carson Wentz instead of a 2018 version and he stays healthy, we see an uptick in that offense. There may be room for both Goddard and Ertz as tight end 1s. I just want to reiterate, tight end was not a very strong position last year. It would not be that shocking if the Eagles offense had a big uptick. They were a top 10 offense or so. Carson Wentz would use those 2 big bodies maybe as an Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski throwback to what the Patriots did. And I just think he's worth a shot in a bunch of leagues. And I really like him as a player moving forward. So Dallas Goedert, big name to keep in mind. Thank you, Ballhawk, once again. Another name I'm going to mention, Ian Thomas for the Carolina Panthers. Finished last year as a 27th tight end. Has a really early ADP of around 29. And Greg Olsen missing 16 games over his last 2 seasons, being 34 years old. I don't really see him as the number 1 tight end in that offense. He'll probably be there for like a hoorah camaraderie guy, blocking and when they need him, but they're probably going to want to keep him fresh, especially for later on in the playoffs or if they're going to need to make the playoffs. So I really expect Ian Thomas to start the year with the big role, and if he capitalizes on it, just continue it throughout the season. Basically, last year, he had a little to no role or a DNP for the first 12 weeks, and then Greg Olsen got hurt, and he had 3 double-digit games out of his last 5. Young guy, big body, lost Devin Funchess in that offense, so it's just DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, 2 not very big guys, so he's going to be, I believe, a big red zone target for that team, especially. Assuming no draft or huge free agent, they might be in the market for a wide receiver in the draft. But even then, I think they're going to be giving him every chance. He had that off season and this preseason to build chemistry with Cam. So I just really like Ian Thomas going forward. You don't even have to spend a lot of draft capital on him right now. He might be rising going forward, but just a name to really keep in the back of your mind. Last name I'm going to mention at tight ends for today is going to be Chris Herndon. And just like Ballhawk Fantasy Football, I'm going to shout out my friend on YouTube and Twitter, Gridiron Guru. He's really pumping this guy up for various reasons, which I agree with him and like him. So I'll post a link to his YouTube, and hopefully you can give him a subscribe or a like if you didn't see my video where I did the same with him yesterday. But he's obviously the tight end for the New York Jets. Finished last year 15th tight end, and then being drafted at around a 16 right now, extremely early. Another 23-year-old, extremely young player. Darnold as his roommate. That's also going to bring him a little bit of extra attention. Another rookie guy who was drafted in his class. They're sort of brought up together. Off season, I don't expect very much to happen, so I expect him to be their number one on the Jets, undisputedly. Le'Veon Bell just going to help open up some lanes for him. Robbie Anderson and Jamison Crowder, not really game breaker guys, so I would expect him to be heavily targeted and looked at. He was really efficient when he did play last year, and I definitely would expect him to be a red zone threat as well. So those are just 5 names who I'd really like to look at in terms of risers next year. Hopefully you do too. Before I end the video, I did want to mention just a few more things. One being Tyreek Hill in the NFL is investigating into him for a supposed battery charge. That would obviously be devastating news for Patrick Mahomes and that offense, losing a ton of players on the defense and Tyreek Hill. If this is true, they'll be able to focus in on Kelsey. Man, hoping Watkins stays healthy. I think this would really be extremely devastating news all around. They'd probably lose a few wins. I'd be giving that division to the Chargers. If it's anything like a Kareem Hunt 10-game suspension, man, I can't even say. That would just be so bad for that team. They'd probably be fighting for a wild card, and I'm not even sure I'd predict them to make it. I can't even think of a worse loss for a team right now. It's really bad for that team. Hopefully it's not true, but if it is, that stinks. It puts us fantasy players and predictors in a really tough position. We just have to wait and see with that one. And finally, I did want to mention that especially with tight ends and the risers comments, there's so many more players I would have loved to mention, and I will be highlighting them in the future, most likely with individual team highlight videos each day before the fantasy year actually starts. Sometime after the draft, I'm going to be highlighting each individual team, what happened, and who I like with them. Austin Hooper, Mike Gesicki for the Dolphins, Mark Andrews, a few names who I'd really love to talk about here, and I will be talking about in the future. So I really hope you guys subscribe to the guys I mentioned, and we just really keep this fantasy football community growing and get a good thing happening with my channel. I really love talking to you guys today. Hope you all have a great day, and I will look forward to posting another video in the future. Take it easy, everybody.